Hi, dear students. Welcome to the sixth session of Nationalism in India of class 10th history lesson. In our last class, we have already discussed the civil disobedience movement, salt satyagraha, etc. And we have finished with the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. Today, we are going to understand how the participants saw the movement. Here we are going to learn how the rich peasant community, poor peasant community, business class people, industrial workers, and the women community saw the civil disobedience movement, or what was the role of these five groups in civil disobedience movement. After that, we will also discuss the limits of civil disobedience movement. Here we are going to understand the role of Dalits and Muslims in civil disobedience movement. We will also understand in the part of Dalits the ideological difference between Gandhiji and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So these are the few topics we are going to discuss today. At first, let us look at different social groups that participated in civil disobedience movement. Dear students, here we are not going to discuss the civil disobedience movement organized by Gandhiji, but here we are going to analyze why did the different social groups participate in civil disobedience movement. Here we will see first rich peasants community. The rich peasant community like Padidars of Gujarat and Jats of UP. They were the rich communities who participated actively in civil disobedience movement. They were the producers of commercial crops. Actually, they were disappointed in trade depression and falling of price in 1929. They failed to pay government tax due to the lack of income. The government did not reduce the tax even though the Great Depression affected adversely to the peasant communities. So, they became the active participants of civil disobedience movement, and about them, the fight for Swaraj was nothing but struggle against the high revenue or high tax. So just understand that the rich peasant community actively participated in civil disobedience movement. Their main aim of participating civil disobedience movement was reducing the revenue which is to be paid to British. They suffered a lot due to the economic depression of 1929. They were deeply disappointed when civil disobedience movement was called off or withdrew by Gandhiji in 1931 before the British government revived the revenue structure. So they disagreed to join civil disobedience movement when it was restarted in 1932. So briefly understand that rich peasant community actively participated civil disobedience movement to get the revenue deducted or reduced by British as well as to solve the economic or trade depression. Now let us discuss the role of poor peasants. Many of the poor peasants cultivated in the lands of the landlords by paying rent. Remember, poor peasants means the peasants who have very little land or most of them who cultivate in the land of others by paying rent. So, when economic depression continued, these poor peasants found much difficulty to pay the rent to the landlords. So, about them, Swaraj was nothing but abolition of rent to the landlord. They joined in many radical movements led by communist and socialist against British. But here Congress was not ready to support no rent campaign of poor peasants because it would upset the rich merchants and landlords. So the relationship between the poor peasants and Congress became uncertain during civil disobedience movement. Briefly understand that poor peasants also participated in civil disobedience movement in different part of the country because they were suffering from the high rent due to the fall of price as well as the failure of crops. They were demanding the reduction of rent or no rent, but the Congress did not support their no rent campaign. So about them, Swaraj was nothing but reduction in land rent. Thirdly, let us analyze why did the business class people join civil disobedience movement. During World War I, the Indian merchants and industrialists made huge profits because there was much demand for the machine-made products or war-related products. When they were trying to expand their business, the British restrictions on their business activities really disappointed them. Remember, the business class people suffered a lot, first of all, from the British restrictions imposed on business activities. These business class people demanded protection from import of foreign goods. British imported many foreign goods that reduced the value and the price of the indigenous product or Indian products. Their major another demand was rupees sterling foreign exchange ratio. Actually, the value of Indian rupee was very less compared to the British sterling. So, the Indian business class demanded a good ratio between rupees and sterling. To organize business interest, the business class found Indian Industrial and Commercial Congress IICC in 1920 and Federation of the Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industries in 1927 FICCI. They were led by prominent industrialists like G.D. Birla, Purushottam Das, Tukur Das, etc. They supported civil disobedience movement by giving financial assistance and refused to buy or sell foreign goods. So about the business class people, Swaraj was nothing but the elimination of colonial restrictions on business activities. After the failure of Roundtable Conference, this business class became less enthusiastic. Next, let us discuss the role of industrial workers. The industrial workers did not participate in civil disobedience movement in large numbers except in Nagpur region. So in Nagpur region, large number of industrial workers participated, but other places it was very less. The industrialists came very close to the Congress, so the industrial workers stayed aloof. So just understand that industrial workers are the workers who work in the factories or different industries in the industrial sector. But actually Congress had a very close relationship with the industrialist or the owners of the industries. So the workers stayed little away from the Congress. The workers who participated in civil disobedience movement boycotted foreign goods while they were protesting against low wages. So just understand that the workers of industries, they joined the boycott movement or rejecting the foreign goods. The railway workers did strike in 1930 as well as 1932 as a part of civil disobedience movement. In 1930, thousands of workers of Chota Nagpur tin mine, they wore Gandhi cap and participated in rallies. But Congress was reluctant to include workers' demand as a part of its program of struggle. So just understand that as far as the industrial workers are considered, they were not so largely participated in civil disobedience movement due to the attitude of Indian National Congress, but only in the Chota Nagpur region they very largely participated. And the last group that we are going to analyze the role in civil disobedience movement is women. The women participated in large numbers in civil disobedience movement. During Dandi March, thousands of women came out to listen Gandhiji's words. Women participated in marches, rallies, and they even manufactured salt by violating salt law. The women picketed foreign clothes shops and even liquor shops. Many of them were imprisoned during the civil disobedience movement. In urban areas, the women came out from the high caste families. But in rural areas, the women were from rich peasant families. The women considered service to nation is a sacred duty. Civil disobedience movement increased the public role of women, but no radical changes happened in the way the women were visualized in the society. That means, during civil disobedience movement, many women came out from the kitchen and joined in the public movement, but it did not change the vision of society, that society usually consider women as weak and not fit for public role. But this visualization did not change even after that also. Gandhiji addressed the women, be good wives and good mothers. But for a long time, Congress was not happy to give any responsible authority to women in Congress. So, dear children, briefly understand that the women very largely participated in civil disobedience movement. Next, let us understand the limits or the reasons of the failure of civil disobedience movement. Just understand that not all social groups were moved by the concept of Swaraj. Not also all social groups participated in civil disobedience movement. The two important groups who were not joined with the civil disobedience movement was Dalits and Muslims. First, let us discuss Dalits. Congress ignored Dalit community due to the presence of Sanatanis or conservatives. Means Congress was close with the conservative people. That means who believe in the old practices and customs. So Congress kept Dalits little away. Gandhiji declared that Swaraj would not come for 100 years if untouchability exists in our society. You know, untouchability was a superstitious, wrong practice existed in our society, that high caste people are not supposed to touch the low caste people, or the low caste people should not mix with the high caste people for any social or any personal activities. Gandhiji called the Dalits as Harijan or children of God. Gandhiji was the first person who organized satyagrahas to get entry into the temples, to get access to the public wells, public tanks, public roads and schools. You know, the SC/ST or the Harijan or the Dalit people of our country had no permission to get entry into many temples of our country, or to take water from the public wells, or to use many roads and schools, etc. So that is the system we called the untouchability. So Gandhiji organized satyagrahas to remove these barricades. Gandhiji cleaned the toilets of the streets to dignify the work of sweepers. So Gandhiji cleaned the toilet and showed that every work has its own dignity. The Dalit leaders were keen to find a political solution for their social backwardness, so the Dalit people, they demanded reserved seats in educational institutions and separate electorate. The Dalit people leaders, they thought that political empowerment of Dalits will solve the social disabilities of Dalit people. So Dalit participation was very limited in civil disobedience movement, particularly in Maharashtra and Nagpur. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was the first who organized depressed class association in 1930 and clashed with Gandhiji in second round table conference by demanding separate electorate. So understand what is separate electorate. Separate electorate demanded by Dalits or B.R. Ambedkar was a particular constituency in which only the Dalit voters include. The Dalit voters will elect a Dalit person from that constituency. That was separate electorate. Even today we have SC/ST reserved constituencies, but that constituency include all the caste and religious people. But here B.R. Ambedkar and others demanded a constituency that consists only Dalits. But Gandhiji opposed this idea. When British government allowed the demands of Ambedkar, that is separate electorate for Dalits, Gandhiji began fasting until death. Because Gandhiji was totally against the separate electorate. Gandhiji believed that the separate electorate would slow down the process of their integration, their mixing into the society. Gandhiji actually wanted Dalit people to be mixed with the other high caste people or the society. But B.R. Ambedkar and others demanded separate electorate for Dalits. So Gandhiji believed that it would slow down the process of integration. Ultimately, Ambedkar accepted Gandhiji's position and the result was Puna Pact of September 1932. So according to the Puna Pact of 1932, reserved seats for Dalits were allowed in provincial and central legislative councils, but they were voted by general electorate. So just understand that Puna Pact gave reserved constituencies for Dalits, but selected by all the people of that constituency. Next, let us see Muslim political organization. Or why was Muslim reluctant to participate in civil disobedience movement? Muslim political organization also did not respond to the civil disobedience movement. Means Muslims were also not so actively participated in civil disobedience movement. After non-cooperation movement, Muslims felt alienated or separated from Congress. So during non-cooperation movement as well as during Khilafat movement, Muslims and Congress were very close. But after 1920, Congress became close with the Hindu Mahasabha. Hindu Mahasabha was a religious institution or a religious association that include only Hindus. So Hindu-Muslim relation became worsened during this time and each community organized processions separately. Means Hindus organized separate rallies, Muslims organized separate rallies. Many cities of India witnessed communal riots or communal clashes between Hindus and Muslims. Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Aga Khan were the main Muslim leaders. Muhammad Ali Jinnah also demanded reserved seats for Muslims in Central Assembly and provinces. All the effort of Hindu-Muslim renegotiation ended when M.R. Jekar of Hindu Mahasabha opposed the compromise. So, when civil disobedience movement was relaunched, Muslims did not show interest. They feared that the culture and identity of minorities would be submerged under the domination of majority communities. So just understand that during civil disobedience movement, there was Hindu-Muslim disunity in our country. Muslims thought that the Hindus will dominate the Muslim religion and the minorities would be submerged under the domination of these major communities. Congress had a close relationship with Hindu Mahasabha. So Muslims felt separated and it increased the gap between Congress and Muslims. So Muslims were not very actively participated in civil disobedience movement. Dear children, today we have understood how the different organizations, groups participate in civil disobedience movement, as well as the role of Hindus and Dalits in civil disobedience movement. In next class, there is a final class of lesson of nationalism in India. We will discuss the topic, the sense of collective belonging. If you have any doubts about today's class, please contact me and read all the chapter very thoroughly. Next week or after, you will have a test related to the Indian nationalism, objective as well as subjective. So read the lesson very thoroughly, underline the important points, and send me the photos of the textbook lesson as well as the assignments within evening today. Thank you.